Right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, ngā mihi kia tātou, I tēnei ata. My humblest apologies for catching COVID. I'm probably the last one in New Zealand to catch it, but it finally got me. And I would have much preferred to have been there with you today in person, because there's lots to do in relation to this kaupapa. So today, I just want to acknowledge everyone in the room and the multiple and different agencies that are brought together in the numbers that we have attending this particular hui. And I think it's important that we're speaking this way across to everybody, given that the task that we want to achieve is a significant change in the way that we are utilising kaupapa Māori as a concept, and to build its potential even more in terms of its capacity to make change and transforming outcomes for Māori.
But Graham, aroha mai, on your top screen, can you try click on use slideshow up the top right? On the right, left, sorry. As we did was, yeah, try that use slideshow. Can you see that? Or switch displays, because we're not seeing the full screen.
Oh, okay. Use
Try that one. There we go. Perfect.
All right. Just a sound check. Is the sound all right? Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
You've got the whole room attention now.
All right. So today, there's really three things I'd like to do. And the first thing is that, as I said, is to acknowledge everybody's contribution. And I don't underestimate that there's some in the room who have a good handle on what kaupapa Māori is about. There are others who are still figuring it out. There are yet others, and this is the part that I'm wanting to respond to, who simply use kaupapa Māori as code for the Māori perspective, and that's it. And they miss the deeper meaning of what kaupapa Māori transforming potential should be. So today, talking about kaupapa Māori and its background, I was asked to address the history of kaupapa Māori, but I won't be doing that because I don't listen to what I'm told, apparently. But I'll be looking at kaupapa Māori of where we're up to. That's how I want to put it, not the history, where we are up to, because it's a initiative that's still in progress and is still has lots of potential, and is still in that sense underdeveloped. So there's the second part is the kaupapa Māori element of it, and in particular the relationship with the philosophy of Te Aho Matua. I'm not going to address that so much. That's taken for granted. I think that that's sort of sacrosanct at the core of what we do. It doesn't need critically unpacking or engaging. There are pathways to getting to know that and how the philosophy and to understand it. And that's important, a part of the kura development itself. The second part is how kaupapa Māori, the learnings of a kaupapa Māori approach might be used as a pedagogy, a cultural or critical political pedagogy for transforming. And that's where most of the agencies and most of the policy workers, most of the practitioners are wanting to also augment their productivity by using a kaupapa Māori approach from time to time. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a few slides, then I'm going to come back and just extract a few comments from a paper I've written recently. And you'll get the gist of it because the paper is entitled The Domestication of the Māori Education Struggle and the Need for Renewal. And I'll extract a few comments from that before finishing off. Right, so this is a little bit about me, positionality. So I come from all these iwi, and I'm currently speaking to you from Wanganui, from the awa. The beginning, if we take a little bit of a historical look back, and the beginning of Kohanga Reo and Kura Kaupapa Māori was at a time in the 90s, it really began with the disaffection that was boiling and bubbling away in the 1960s and 1970s. There were a number of issues that were afoot. There was the Benton research, the finding of the supposedly the imminent death of Māori language. The surveys conducted by Richard Benton caused widespread alarm amongst Māori ourselves at that time. There was the monocultural schooling system, which was very much part and parcel of this way in which myself and others were educated in the 1960s and the 1970s. The prevailing theory in those days about when Māori weren't achieving very well compared to Pākehā, it was explained as deficit theorizing. That is, there was something wrong with Māori themselves, their culture, or their way of life. So you can see this picture of negativity building up around education and Māori. And then, of course, the overall picture and goal was seemingly assimilation, to assimilate Māori as quickly as possible, even though there was talk of integration and other policies. The policy speak was different from the actions. The actions were assimilation as quickly as possible, it seemed. And of course, all this while, there's this persisting inequities that relate to Māori, and have been present before schooling in the 60s and 70s, and are still present today. And it's something that I've tried to focus on myself. My work has been to try and understand how we can intervene in that word persisting, the persistence of inequities that relate to significant numbers of Māori, given that high and disproportionate numbers of Māori are found in most of the socio-economic indices in our particular policy regime. So we're the key focus has to be, how do we overcome our socio and economic positioning? And of course, one of the key connectors here is that we won't have an overthrow of our socio and economic conditions in our wider community context without a prior or simultaneous educational revolution. So the advent of kohanga and kura in the 1980s actually provided the opportunity for a bit of a revolution of schooling. And one of the elements that is underpinning this persistence is this seemingly, I don't know, it's sort of blind faith by the state in itself, in its own policies, that one day they will get it right. And we keep on doing the same old things that are not shifting or changing or making a difference. And the one thing that has made a difference was the revolution in the 1980s of kohanga and kura. And it was the element of self-development inside of that, which I think is a key issue that we should understand. But that change in the 1980s is significant. So just to reflect, this is the type of schooling. When I went to school, that's what we did. My aspiration was to be a milk monitor, so you could have 3 bottles of milk. You got to deliver it to all the other kids and got the leftovers. Deficit theory, again, I don't really want to go in and explain this. Most of you will know what deficit theory is. The problematic is that in education today, there's a large number of older principals who were actually trained in this ideology and still believe in it. That's, there's something wrong, with the Māori family. They tend to have larger families, many more dependents within one household, a high occupancy rate that is more dependence on a single income earner. You add together socio-cultural factors where older kids are expected to look after the young kids, and that the adults don't spend that much time with their children and so on. These were all the charges that were leveled against Māori families in the 60s, 70s. And of course, just on that, older kids with the younger kids, that of course has become a significant factor in kura kaupapa Māori, in the sense of the tuakana teina pedagogy, where older kids do have responsibility for younger kids. And that notion is turned into a notion of faster kids are meant to help the slower kids, and so on. So it's slightly a different interpretation in the kura. But in those early days, in the 60s and 70s, these were seen as negative elements that impacted on Māori learning. And all of these added up to, low levels of attainment. It was exacerbated by a so-called language problem. That is, Māori kids couldn't speak England properly. And so they were seen as being deficient in the language, that and therefore their access to learning was limited, because that was mainly through English. All of this added up to them getting lower status jobs, and therefore lower socioeconomic status in the community, etc. And that in turn fed back into this vicious cycle again of repeating itself. So these are sort of a cumulative set of elements that fed in this deficit theory. So that was an explanation. Most Māori didn't believe that, of course. But along in 1980s, after a tour, a Fulbright scholarship trip away to the States and New Mexico, Karapukutapu saw the idea of the language nest, brought it back, and talked to his officials about it. They organised the Hui Taumata conference. He got senior officials into his office. They seeded the idea of the kohanga reo. They went to the conference, and they were split up into the breakout rooms, and they were able to seed the idea and let people discuss it. And it came back to the floor as the main idea. That was what people wanted to do, to initiate this rescue of the language at that time. So kohanga reo began. All right, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, other than to say there's lots of different things that happened in the Tamaki area. So Tamaki is pretty critical in the development of the Kura Kaupapa Māori movement. Kohanga, of course, was initiated across the length and breadth of the country. But Kura Kaupapa Māori, when the kids turned 5, developed in a couple of key places in Ruamata and in Waititi. Those were the 2 Matua schools that developed that. And then the Kura Kaupapa Māori movement, right? Here's a subtlety here, which is slightly different. The Kura Kaupapa Māori movement emerged with Tuki Nepe and others, and I was in that group. That was aimed, our purpose was aimed at trying to change the system in New Zealand to create a system type of schooling to cater for the kohanga reo graduates. Because at that time, Pete's school, Waititi, could only accommodate their own kohanga reo kids, and they couldn't accommodate any of the others in the Auckland area. So we were told to go to bilingual schools by the ministry. Our kids lasted about, I think, be lucky to last a semester there, and they bailed. So we were trying to change the schooling system to enable us to develop more schools. And then as a consequence of that, a number of schools developed off the back of Awhireina School, the college, then into Maungawhau, Waipareda, and so on, alongside the 2 Matua schools. And then down the line, other schools were developing off the back of Ruamata, and so on. So the schools sort of blossomed from there. But I'm sort of tracing a long history of struggle by a number of parents, and actually I always acknowledge that the brave ones in this struggle were not us who were running around there doing the politics. In the end, it was the parents who gave their kids, made those decisions to opt out of the system and try something new. And anyway, over time, lots of things happened that we can point to, including going to Parliament to change the government select committee and developing policy and a government a change in the Act to allow for the schools and so on. And of course, kohangas were flourishing. So this is Mo Mafo and Awhirenga School and Waipareta out at Kelston School of the Deaf. Just different activities. Different schools. Tuakana Teina Pedagogy. Hone Waititi introduced Pākehā lessons, where the kids had to march off the ground to do Pākehā lessons for 1 or 2 hours a week and then come back. And just not acknowledging in that photo on the left there, Emaraina Mihaere, Kumatea, she passed away about 2 weeks ago. So just acknowledging that and her whānau. The young lady in the pink, she ended up playing for the Pulse in Wellington. I take full credit as her phys ed teacher for that. She's also 2 weeks ago just passed her oral examinations for her PhD. And she's now Dr. Kahurangi Waititi. That middle photo on the left with Tony Waho and Heikoko and Tuki and others is the group who developed Te Aho Matua over a weekend. And that happened because the ministry had said, so you want to start your own schooling type. Why do you want to start your own schooling type? And we said, because we have a different philosophy of education. And then they said to us, well, what is it? And we said, hold that thought, we'll be back next week. And we went off and wrote Te Aho Matua. And that's how it was brought together. It was there, but it needed to be written. Started our own teacher program there in Auckland. Then Tom and Carr started their own version of it. And I'm currently working at Massey, right next door to the current Kaupapa Māori teacher training program. We still need teachers. If you know anybody, we're still recruiting hard. But the same philosophy, after we were successful there, it was pretty obvious to move on to the next step. And so we moved into the wānanga on the back of Irene Moko's ideas and helped him build the Whare Wānanga o Awanuiarangi, which is very successful today. Very successful graduate granting institution, of course, and I know Meta's somewhere in the audience. who's in charge of the graduates development. So my PhD research was based on asking the parents of Kohanga Reo children and Kura Kaupapa Māori children why they had opted out of state schooling at great risks to themselves and put their children into this new form of alternative education. I received all of these answers from all of the hundreds of responses. I aggregated the answers into 6 key intervention elements. I look for the 6 most important elements, and they presented themselves pretty clearly. And then I listed those 6 key intervention elements. And what I was thinking was that if I could name what the magic was that inspired Māori parents to take these great risks to make change, could we wrap up that magic and apply it in other places to again make change? So I was looking for a theory of transforming, a theory that would engage our people, to inspire them to get involved too, in the same way that they did with Kohanga and Kura. And so that's really what the Kaupapa Māori theorising began as, was a transforming theory to engage parents with other potential sites for change and to apply some really critical elements. So here are those early things. All right, now I'm sharing this little bit of history here because it's fundamental to where we are today in relation to kaupapa Māori theorising and practice and transforming work. So the first one was self-determination. Parents said they wanted more control, autonomy, tino rangatiratanga over the education for their children. They didn't want to be the recipients of someone else's idea of what was important education for their kids. Second thing is they wanted all of their traditional knowledge, culture, tikanga, their cultural aspirations and values available to them in an education process, not seen as something different and outside, but as sort of central. They wanted their kids to learn with culturally appropriate and preferred ways of learning. So the way to understand this is the culture of the home should also be experienced as the culture of the school. And when you think about it, particularly those school photos I showed you early on, the culture of the school, as expressed there, was the culture of the Pākehā home, and very much wasn't the culture of our home. You know, it's very different, and it was just that element that there wanted to be some continuity, cultural continuity from home to school. Toby Curtis wrote his thesis on schools need to reflect the marae model, the marae values. It's a very similar sort of thing, that schools should reflect Māori values and so on that are found on the marae. It's an easy thing to do when, but it's often not thought about as being important. This next point was really significant: the mediation of socioeconomic impediments. A lot of parents said they wanted their kids to have an education and to be successful, so that they didn't work in the jobs that they worked in, or didn't have it didn't have a narrow selection of work opportunities. Working in the freezing works or doing seasonal work and things like that. So they saw it as very much as an opportunity to change the socio-economic circumstances of their children's lives. So that was one element of this socio-economic impediment. The other one was that the Māori, or our propensity for to mediate socio-economic circumstances. So, and by that I mean, when two parents, their only job they could do was cleaning offices down Queen Street, and they got up in the morning early, 1 o'clock, and cleaned offices, and Kate the Pie, the kids were got to school by some other member of the whānau. Kids came to school with no kai, didn't matter, because all the kids put all their kai in the middle. Teachers put extra kai. Everyone was fed. When there was a school trip on, everyone went on the trip. Some parents paid for 2 kids. Some, those who couldn't afford, didn't pay. They might have done something else to raise money, and so on. But there was this way of everyone helping each other out to mediate what I call debilitating impact of the socio-economic circumstances on particular families. Extended family structure and practice, whānau or whanaungatanga, very important, and the collective vision, which was the kaupapa itself. So sorry for, I'm going to try and speed up. But, the wonderful production of schools was great. Wonderful kohangas, they were all great. But that really wasn't the revolution that was significant of the 1980s. The real revolution that occurred in my mind, was about 2 inches long. And it was up here. It was a change of mindset by ourselves, a change from waiting for others to make change for us to becoming proactive and making change happen for ourselves. That is the key. And it's a self-determining action of engagement. But the key, and another key thing that happened, this change of mindset, is also it marked the development of the beginning of Māori language in schools and kids feeling good about going to school. Also marked a change in the attitude of parents about the power of schooling. This should not be underestimated, because when I went to school in the 1960s, we hated going to school. Our parents had all these horror stories themselves of their own schooling experience, of being stood in the hallways, whacked, and all these kinds of things. So they hated schooling. So when we went to school, we went to make mischief, carve holes in our desks, basically be non-compliant with the school and make things awkward. But after Kohanga developed in Kura, and parents saw the power of that education may in fact be a good, it's been a huge turnaround by Māori towards education. So some other summary points here. So colonization hasn't gone away, right? It's still here, and it's just changed shape, and it's coming at us in new forms. We need to understand these new formations of colonization. Otherwise, we're wasting our time doing a lot of the interventions that we're trying to do. If we don't have what I call a proper literacy about what's going wrong, then we're going to be overrun again. So we need to understand that some of these new formations, and a lot of them in the current climate, and certainly with the new government, it's re-emerging. A lot of the new formations of colonization are formed around economics. So in respect of colonization, it's coming at us in multiple forms and multiple ways. And I use here the metaphor of the Dutch boy at the dam with the water coming through all these holes, and our need to respond to as many holes as we can. And so we need everyone's effort to try and stem, if you like, these new the being overcome by these new formations of colonization. And in this sense, our struggle is not one struggle, but it's many struggles. And again, we need to look to each other to uplift each other's work to enable a wider coverage for us to engage with holding back some of this stuff. It just, I won't spend too long on this, but here's some new forms of colonization, and they're present right now with the new utterances being made by the current leadership. Equity, there's this idea that being fair is treating everyone exactly the same. We must treat Pākehā New Zealanders the same as Māori. Māori are getting too much. And of course, what that does is if you treat everyone exactly the same, the inequalities that exist will remain. And really, that's what people want. They want to maintain their dominance in society. And so by arguing for the level playing field equity, that will always win out and enable the reproduction of dominance. So you can see that, in a referendum, for example, everyone gets a vote. But if you're a minority interest group, there's a good show that if we wanted to make sure that the treaty was protected, for example, we would be relying on the goodwill of the dominant group for the most part. So it's, again, a way, a sort of a manipulation of democracy, if you like, or democratic process and equity. And that's been the biggest, I think, one of the biggest things that have burdened Māori over recent years has been this continuous projection that equity needs to be the level playing field idea, as opposed to distributive equity, where those who need more should be given more, those who need less get given less, irrespective of who it is. That's called distributive equity, but we keep playing the level playing field, which advantages those who are already advantaged. Democracy, one person, one vote, majority rule doesn't work in the interests of minority groups. Individualism is a big issue for us because individual rights, individual freedoms, those are the basics of libertarian economics. And of course, that's really where ACT is the full-on libertarian economic model. It's all about me and not we. So it's about individual meritocracy, about my own autonomous self, my autonomous wealth, and my autonomous worth, the survival of the wealthiest sort of kind of philosophy, which is immediately and at odds with a collective cultural paradigm that focuses on whānau, hapu, iwi, our responsibilities to each other and so on. So there's contestation there immediately with this notion of individualism, which sits at the core of neoliberalism. And all the way through, all of those things problematic. They come off the back of the Roger Douglas ethos. They waned, but now they're back again in full force. So that's another good reason why we need to be addressing this topic now about how do we enable a kaupapa Māori tool, instrument to work better for the interests of Māori. Well, there's a good example of equity. The level playing field is on the left there with the same size boxes for everybody. And you can see that the one who's disadvantaged remains disadvantaged, as opposed to the other diagram where those who need more are given more. So I went away to Canada, came back. I was there for 8 years, came back, and I saw kaupapa Māori now being used quite widely in all sorts of departments and ministries, starting up kaupapa Māori units, and so on. And I was really disappointed because in many instances, it was being just used as in a very tokenistic, shallow way. It was very superficial. And people were using it just simply as the Māori perspective. So we will give a kaupapa Māori way, a kaupapa Māori perspective. But kaupapa Māori is much more than that. It's a critical positioning tool. And that's what I want to just leave you with here in this particular slide. So I came back and I developed these, what I call the 5 tests of the veracity, or another word for veracity, effectiveness of a kaupapa Māori approach. So when I see people saying, well, I'm using a kaupapa Māori approach here, or we're a kaupapa Māori unit, I'm looking for these types of things, to a lesser or greater extent, but These types of things should be visible. Positionality, that is, do the individuals understand their limits and capacities? Who are, and who are you speaking for? And who is the audience? There's a whole lot of things about our work. If we're doing a piece of work, who are we doing this work for? And are we cognizant of the audience? So in academia, for example, a lot of people write these articles, big flash articles. They go into journals and they're published in a small journal or a big journal with a big reputation, say in Scotland, with no relevance at all in New Zealand, and a lot of kudos academically, but there's bugger all return for our community's transforming need on the ground in New Zealand. So positionality is a big thing about how we need to think about that. Criticality is really about, do we have a sufficient critical analysis of what's going wrong? Now, this is absolutely important, because if we don't understand accurately what the problem is or what's going wrong, then our answers are going to similarly be inaccurate. So that's why it's critical to have this, a good set of critical tools to help us understand some of the hidden elements that are at stake in that play. We should be able to understand and discern unequal power relations of how it's working. We should understand the nuances of equity of how it's working or not working. We should understand the notion of hegemony, of how people are co-opted, our own people are co-opted and become part and parcel of the problem.
Mm.
That is, they take aboard thinking, even though that thinking is liberating, when in actual fact that thinking may in fact be contributing to forming our own colonization. So a good example is, after the war, a lot of Maori soldiers came back and said, we should learn English, it's the way of the world. Never mind the Maori, let's learn English. And of course, they did that in good faith for their kids. Hello. In the end, it was very damaging. But that's what you'd call a hegemony. They genuinely thought it was something that would be useful. But in actual fact, it became the opposite. Practicality at the bottom. Praxis is constant renewal, constant reflection of what's going wrong, and then reflecting on how we can improve it, and then making the change. So this constant cycle of change. And the last point there, transformability has got to be intentional. That when we're applying a kaupapa Māori approach, we've got to be intending some form of transforming outcome. And I make the distinction here between transformation and transforming. So transformation is sort of like, finally, it's done. Whereas I prefer to use the term transforming with the idea of praxis in mind, because transforming we're still not there yet, and it's still being made in terms of its reflection and change. But We can go back on those at some other point. Just reminding everyone that, okay, another good reason why we should be onto this is because of the recent claim for Kura-kaupapa Māori. Same old things are having to be litigated against the ministry. And many of the reasons I've outlined. But the Crown failed to meaningfully engage with Te Rūnanga-Nui on issues facing actually resourcing for the Kuras. Still heavily under-resourced. Kuras still heavily under-resourced all round. Wānanga, same thing, and the same thing for Kohanga, really. And more than that is this divide and rule element where the ministry thinks they can develop a model of their own, e.g. Punareo, that they can control and they can do better. I see that even Punareo are now being targeted as possibly being closed down with the new government. So nothing is forever. So just a few points for consideration. The kaupapa Māori is a critical cultural pedagogy, and we need to reclaim it and protect its transformative potential. Mātauranga Māori definition needs to be sorted out, because in my view, it's not for everybody. Mātauranga Māori is our traditional knowledge and intellectual property, and we need to protect it from exploitation. That's both exploitation from within and without. Third point is we need to revitalize our criticality. Definitely, people need to become more critical. And we're certainly trying to encourage the teaching of critical courses again in the university. But of course, what's one of the first things the neoliberal regime attacks? It's critical studies and sociology. It criticizes anything that uses the word social outcome as being communist, or there's been a worldwide attack, particularly in America, on the whole idea of this, of socialization as being a mechanism for a positive change in society. They don't want us to build society. They want us to build individuals in society, individuals, and will make successful individuals will make the difference in society. That last one there, I've left a few points for people to think about. Now, how's my timing? I can do the big finish or the short finish.
Well, Graham, you can stop sharing now, and we'll pass it over to Jenny.
Did you want me to do the big finish or the short finish?
Who's that?
Graham.